me go ahead and declare a couple of things in my view controller. So let me go over to my view controller, .h and .m. My goal right now is to be able to listen to when the user has typed in their name into that text box and then hit the go button so that I can pop up a little JavaScript style alert that says, "Hi, David," or "Hi, so-and-so." So this means I need to somehow respond to the button press, and I need to somehow programmatically be able to talk from code to the text field so I can see what the user actually typed in. So on the one hand, button press sends a message to an IB action. On the other hand, I need to be able to check from code what the user actually typed into the text field. So we get one IB action and one IB outlet. So let me go ahead here in my properties, or rather in my header file, and I'm going to go ahead and say, give me a property that's going to be non-atomic because I don't care about threading. It's going to be strong, which is a detail we'll come back to. But it's going to be an IB outlet that is pointing to a UI text field. And this text field will be called, say, text field. So in other words, this is a pointer that I'm putting in code that's going to allow me to talk to my GUI, specifically the text field up at top. All right. Next, I'm going to say, you know what? This same class, view controller, has to have a method that's going to get invoked when the user touches that button. So I'm going to specify that it's indeed an IB action, which means this is a method that might be called because of some GUI interaction. I'm going to call it simply go. And I'm going to say that it takes a pointer to a generic object called sender. So recall that ID is like void star. It refers to some Objective-C object. And we'll just generically call it sender to be consistent with IB actions. All right, so now I actually have to implement this stuff. So let me go ahead and copy the declaration here, go into my M file. I really don't know or don't care about these methods right now, so I'm just going to delete that. I don't need this because this is just placeholder code. So let me further eliminate this. Should auto-rotate to interface orientation, I'm going to leave that alone. So by default, this will only support one orientation. I'm going to go ahead and paste this in here. And now I have to implement the functionality that's going to get executed when the user touches that button. But first, let's go back to my nib file. So my nib file is already ready to go. Got my user interface. I've got the beginnings of my source code. Now I have to have these things somehow talk to one another. So I can do this in a couple of ways. I can either right-click on Files Owner, and I see this. Notice now that because I declared a text field, it now appears in this list. And there's nothing connected to it. Notice there's no gray shading. There's no filling in the circle on the right-hand side. There is some stuff here. View, I didn't do any of that. That was handed to me by the template. But the fact that this says text field means I can somehow link these two. Similarly, if I go over here and right-click on name, notice that I see a whole list of possible events that can get triggered as a result of a user doing something with a text field. And the only one I care about is going to be related to did end on exit or edit, some notion of editing having happened. So I'm going to go ahead and do a bit of a leap of faith, and I'm going to hold Control and drag from that text field to Files Owner, and this little blue line happens as by default. If I let go, I then see a list of the things that I can connect this to. But here I've gone in the wrong direction. So that was actually unintentional, but I tried to work it into the story. So here I've gone into the wrong direction, right? I actually want to be able to talk from my code to the interface, to the text field. So I actually need to tell this story in reverse. So I'm going to drag Control from Files Owner to the text field, then let go, and OK, there's my outlet. I am effectively plugging my code by way of Files Owner, which is just a silly icon that represents your code, into this widget by way of the text field outlet. So what does this really mean? I've got this pointer declared in viewcontroller.h. I have not assigned that pointer any value. And in fact, I'm not going to, because Apple's going to do that for me. Simply by having created that blue line from one to the other, when this application is launched and when that user interface is constructed in memory, Apple or Xcode is going to go ahead and assign to this property text field literally the pointer address in memory of wherever that text field ended up. So all of that happens for me. I don't need to do it myself with alloc or anything like that. So now if I go back to my nib file, I also want to do something with go. So when the user clicks go, I'm going to hold Control again, drag to Files Owner and let go. What events do I want to send? Well, go. So I want to go ahead and say when you touch that button, go ahead and trigger the method go. So now let's do a quick sanity check. In my M file I had to do for a moment ago. Let's go ahead and do nslog, and I am here. So just a little sanity check before we actually do something here. method. Oh, and we actually need to do this at synthesize. And how do we go about synthesizing that text view property? Well, recall that we did this, and then we specified go ahead and back this with an instance variable called underscore text field. So that line there is what gives me the getters and setters that makes the property work. As an aside, why the underscore and the equal sign? What's the point of this? I could ignore that altogether and just say this, and the getter and setter would be synthesized. But what does this do for me? So now it doesn't set it as private per se, but it does create an instance variable called what? Underscore text field. So this is, again, just a human convention. It's just useful in your code to be able to distinguish private instance variables from actual method names and the like. So this underscore convention, and do use 1, not 2, which is generally reserved for the compiler, simply is a visual cue to you and your partner that this is some seemingly private instance variable that should be accessed probably via a property. So just a convention. All right, let me go ahead and run this now. And the simulator pops up. Let me go ahead and open the debugging window by clicking this icon on the bottom. And let me go ahead and click Go. And voila, my code did in fact get executed. So now let's make this application more interesting than actually just having this little silly NS string. So let's go ahead and do this. First, I want to go ahead and show an actual alert, sort of JavaScript style. So I'm going to declare an NS string. Star S gets NS string. And we're going to go string with format. It can get a little confusing with the autocomplete, but most of these methods become familiar over time. Let me close this window here to give us more room. So string with format, I'm going to say something like hello, comma, at, let's say, whoops, %at, and then exclamation point, close quote, comma, self.text field.text. So what is this line of code doing? We've not seen quite this line before. But take a guess as to what it's doing. Left-hand side, sort of C style, we've declared a pointer called S to an object of type NS string. What's going on the right-hand side? Carl? Don't stretch.
It's just making a string with the formatting where you plug in the text field's text into the %at place.
OK.
And then it becomes a string hello, whatever the text field is.
OK, perfect. So NSString is, again, a class, which apparently implies that string with format is what kind of method? Instance or class method? So it's a class method. And this is what's generally known as a convenience method, which is something that does alloc for you, so you don't have to do alloc and then an init. So string with format creates a string, sort of like printf with that formatting. %at means put an NS string here, not a char star. And then comma self.text field. Well, why did I say .text at the end? Why would this be wrong?
Maybe like an object.
Perfect. So self.text field would induce the getter for that UI text field object. And we don't want to plug an object into the string. We want to plug the actual string. So just like in JavaScript, you have DOM elements that have .value properties. Similarly here is their .text, which literally returns a string representation of whatever the user typed into that string. Now take a guess. Why is Xcode yelling at me with this yellow triangle for this one line of code, which is syntactically correct now? Yeah. Exactly. It's a warning, not an error. It just means I haven't actually used S. So let's go ahead and use S. I'm going to go ahead now and declare a UI alert view, which is kind of like a pop-up, as we'll soon see. I'm going to call it alert, a pointer there too. And then I'm going to assign it the result of calling UI alert view. I'm going to go ahead and alloc one of these objects. And then I'm going to go ahead and init with title. And this is going to be messy briefly, quote unquote, hello. Then I'm going to go ahead and say a message of S. Then I'm going to go ahead and say a delegate of nil, and I'll clean this up in a second. A cancel button title of quote unquote thanks, and a cancel other button titles of just nil. All right. What did I miss? There we go. Thank you. Whoops. That's why it was all messy there for a second. All right. And then here, done. OK. So it got a little messy there. But we can line, what's wrong here? Delegate here. So this Xcode does this for you. Notice how all the colons line up? That's an attempt to make it more readable. What is the name, as an aside, of this method? This name of this method is init with title, message, delegate, cancel button title, other button titles, colon. So that's the name of this method. All right, so what's actually going on here? First, let's go ahead and spoil the results and actually see this thing in action. I need to call one other thing. I need to say alert show. Now I have hopefully a working application. So let me go ahead and rerun this. Let me go ahead and boot this up here. Let me go ahead and now click in the text field. And notice by default it pulls up the keyboard. That's default behavior that you get for free by using a UI text view. I'm going to go ahead and type David and click Go. And hello, David. So what's inside of this alert view now? So notice the title is indeed hello. The button that's going to cancel this thing just says thanks. And then we have some kind of placeholder here, which is literally plugged in that value. So what's going on over here? So UI alert view is a class. We've allocated an object using this class method. We're then calling what's effectively a constructor with a whole bunch of arguments. One of which is the title. One of which is the method we want passed, the message we want to display. A delegate we'll come back to. A delegate we'll see is an object that's going to be informed when I click that thanks button to dismiss it. So you have this way of actually listening for events after you've pulled up something like this. Cancel button title is obviously that button's string. And then other buttons title, if you wanted to have an OK or cancel, those kinds of buttons, you can embed them with a comma separated list right there. All right, so any questions about what we just did here? Well, let's do one other nicety. Let me go ahead and click thanks. I feel like it'd be nice to kind of clean things up, like getting rid of the keyboard. So realize that we can also do things like this. So as soon as this go method is called, I can pass a message to the text field that resigns first responder status. So this is a general notion that you'll see throughout iOS. First responder, much like in the medical world, refers to the person who got to the scene first. And in this case, if you touch the text area, the keyboard's going to come up because the text field was the first thing apparently to respond to that key press. That is to say, if you had things layered on top of one another on the UI, whoever responds first is the so-called first responder. If I pass this message called resign first responder to the object called text field, that's going to send it a message saying, there's nothing to see here. Undo whatever you just did. And what did it do? It triggered the keyboard to come up. So now by resigning first responder status, if I recompile and rerun this, I'll actually see that the keyboard should, which is slightly aesthetically more interesting, now goes away. So another example of passing a message, this time involving the notion of first responder status. And suppose next, I feel like this app could be a little better, right? It's underwhelming, admittedly. But if I click thanks, it'd be nice if I could somehow clear the name David that's still now lingering, and I'm going to have to, if I want to play this game again, I have to click in the text view and hit delete, 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 delete. Let's see if we can actually make this a little better. So I somehow want to be able to listen for the user touching that button so as to respond to them subsequently by clearing the name David automatically. So I need to tweak one thing here. I'm going to go into my H file, and I'm going to say, you know what? Rather than just declare a class called viewController that inherits everything from UI viewController, you know what? I'm going to go ahead and promise to implement a UI alert view delegate protocol. So in other words, I've read the documentation on the things called UI alert views, and the documentation told me that, hey, by the way, if you implement this protocol and one or more of its methods, you can then respond to messages that the alert view might send back to you. In other words, I was dismissed. The user clicked thanks. So I have to specify that I'm going to implement that protocol, and then I just need to implement one other thing. Let me go ahead and actually hold Option, and I don't remember what the syntax is, so I'm going to hold Option here. I'm going to click on this thing, and now notice a little pop-up comes up that reminds me what this thing does. Here's the reference, so let me go ahead and click that, and it should open the documentation. And indeed, if I implement this protocol, notice that I could implement now any one or any more of these methods. And among them are, let's see, alert view did dismiss with button index. So that's the one I care about. That is the message that if I implement support for will be passed to me saying the user clicked thanks. The user dismissed that alert view. So let's go ahead and just see a little more detail. Let me click on that in the documentation. And sure enough, it just confirms that. So it tells me that if I implement this, I have to pass in a pointer to the alert view. I have to pass in, or rather, I will be passed a pointer to the alert view object, and I will be passed an NS integer, 0, 1, 2, 3. If you had a UI alert view that had multiple buttons, like OK and cancel, you'd be told this is 0, this is 1, this is 2, and so forth. This tells me exactly what these are doing in more detail. So let's go ahead and try to implement this. Let me go back to my H file. I've definitely declared that I'm implementing this protocol. Now I'm going to go into my M file, and I'm going to implement only that one method. It's an instance method according to the documentations. It's void. It's called alert view : and now I have to pass